Welcome to Emerging Franchise Brands, the podcast that introduces you to the visionary founders of America's fastest growing franchise opportunities. We'll also hear from industry pros as they share insights on what it really takes to achieve the elusive milestone of 100 plus locations. I am your host, Frank Fumey, founder of I9 Sports, and my 20-year journey from inception to acquisition has given me a unique perspective on how to succeed in franchising. Join me as we welcome today's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. On today's show, I have the founder of Twinkle Toes Nanny Agency, Kristy Bickmeyer. Kristy, how are you? Welcome to the show.
I'm well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming all the way here to Tampa to be in studio with me. I understand you came from Gainesville.
Yep, from Gainesville.
A little bit of a drive, but thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks for the invite.
So, Twinkle Toes Nanny Agency, why don't you share with the audience kind of the origin of how this thing started?
Okay. Well, I was a nanny throughout my college years and then some. And then I had my first child in 2010 and needed a nanny. So I thought, well, I was one. I can find one. You know, and in those days, it was Craigslist. That was how we found and hired. And so I went to Craigslist, and the crazy people that applied it was shocking. So I did that as best I could. I couldn't find anybody. At the time, the only option was a placement agency. I don't know if a lot of people know what that is, but a placement agency is kind of the traditional nanny agency structure.
Okay.
So you pay anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 to an agency. And for that $2,000 to $5,000, you get a list of nannies to interview. And then you pay the money once you pick somebody. They're guaranteed typically for 90 days. You have to come up with a contract for them. They have screened them and interviewed them, but you've got to pay them. You've got to pay their payroll taxes. If they get sick, your eggs are kind of all in one basket. So that's it. So at the time, we were both just out of college. We didn't have $2,000 to $5,000 to drop on a nanny that may or may not work out. So luckily, in that particular case, my mother-in-law and my mom were able to kind of piece it together and keep my son. So I didn't need anyone. But the wheels had started spinning at that point where I was thinking, there's got to be a business in here somewhere. If I'm having this issue, other moms are having this issue. And then I was thinking from the business standpoint, it made no sense. If I owned that business model, I would get $2,000 to $5,000 per customer, and that's it. So there's no ongoing revenue. If you do your job well as the person placing the nanny, that nanny's going to stay for, a few years, and then the kids go to school and that's it. So I was just thinking about it from all these different angles. And then I was thinking, as a nanny, what did I feel like was missing? Because I worked for that agency.
Okay.
I worked for the placement agency. And when I needed a sick day, I didn't get that. I worked for 2 surgeons. So I went to work when I had strep, when I had the flu. When I was, whatever was going on, I had to work because they weren't going to cancel surgery, because I was sick, but there was no backup for me. I remember one time I wanted to go on vacation when I was in college with my parents. I had to find my own backup. So I had one of my friends come in and fill in for me for that week so I could take vacation. So I was thinking about it just from all these different perspectives of how this could be so much better. And so what I came up with was Twinkle Toes, which is no placement fee, no application fee. You pay the hourly rate to the agency pays the nanny. There's backup. We have a whole online scheduling system where if the nanny needs time off, she puts it on there. Someone else can pick it up and fill in. It's more of a network of nannies and families.
Why hasn't anybody done this?
That's a great question, but I'm glad they haven't.
Yeah, I'm glad for your sake too. It sounds so obvious though. You would think any agency that realizes my customer, there's no repeat customers if the nanny is good.
Right.
Yeah, they're one and done.
That was the issue that I saw. And I think a lot of industries are like this where it's, things have just always been done a certain way.
Because that's the way it's always been done.
Yes. And it's, I see people on Facebook groups and stuff. I'm in these nanny agency owner groups, and they're all placements, and they just do not understand what we do and how it's different. And it's not rocket science. It's more of it's set up the same way a cleaning agency would be. You know, you pay the company pays overhead, pays the workers. it's just like any other business.
It makes too good of sense.
Yeah, it makes way more sense from every position.
Right. What were you doing for a living at the time that you needed to hire a nanny?
I was a property manager.
Okay. Mm-hmm. When you had this realization, okay, this is a business. How much time went by until you actually took action?
My son was born in January. I went back to work in March, and I registered the LLC in May.
Oh, okay. We wasted no time.
No time. But it was just going to be a side gig. You know,
Okay.
I was just going to still keep the safe corporate job with the insurance and the 401k
Sure.
and just kind of do this on the side. And then I realized pretty quickly, like, oh, this is like, I can't do both of these well.
Mm-hmm.
So I need to pick one. So I picked the independent freedom route, which was definitely less safe, no 401k, but paid off.
This was your first business?
Yes.
And were you brought up in an entrepreneurial family?
No.
And
in fact, they're like very risk averse. Both
Okay.
my parents. My dad's a dentist, and he even sold his private practice when I was 3 because he could not deal with the stress and with like the business ownership part of it. He didn't like, not being home on the weekends all the time and, having to work late. And he sold it and took a job teaching dentistry at the University of Florida.
Okay.
And my mom tried to talk me out of Twinkle Toes every chance she got
That's
because it was too risky and too much liability. And
Right.
yeah, they were not on board.
And that's super common. We talk about this with other guests all the time. I always say, our friends, our family, they love us. They don't want us to see us fail because they don't see it for themselves.
Right.
They don't see the vision that you see.
Right.
Yeah. So okay, the LLC is incorporated in May of 2011, I guess it is. You quit the property management job?
I didn't quit it for maybe a year, something like that. I tried to juggle both. So it was maybe a year.
Did the business take off quite a bit in that first year that it made it easier to say, hey, I can't do both?
No. I mean, it was slow, it was slowly because I was still figuring out the pricing structure. And are we going to have a membership fee? Do I do it more like kind of like a babysitting club type thing where they pay a fee? And then, it took a little bit of practice and trial and error to figure out, where I landed, which is what we still do. So there was a little bit of that. And then just getting the word out, it takes a little while.
How did you find nannies and how did you find clients back then?
I found nannies on Craigslist. And it sounds so crazy now to even say that because like who in their right mind would go there? But this was 13 years ago. That was what we did. So yeah, it was word of mouth, Craigslist. Families were mostly word of mouth. Some of them were people that I knew. That's what I mean when I say word of mouth. Like it was my mouth spreading the word. I didn't have a network out there. It was my mouth. But one great thing was the family, the 2 surgeons that I worked for. They were super supportive. I wasn't their nanny anymore, but they said like, come to our hospital and talk to like the HR person, talk to the residency recruiter, give them your brochures. So they really opened doors for me.
Oh, wow.
And once you've got all these doctors who need nannies because daycare hours aren't suitable for residence hours. So once that happened, that really, it started blowing up. And then, then the word of mouth started spreading.
What an incredible niche to just go with doctors. I mean, to have that community of all the surgeons and doctors in the hospital. Wow.
That was a huge opportunity that they really came through in that one. And I'm still friends with them now. I think they live in Minnesota, but they're yeah, we're still in touch.
So you were running the business, and when did it start turning the corner where you feel like it was really growing and now starting to sustain itself? How long did that take?
Sustain itself, I definitely wasn't paying myself when I left the corporate job. I mean, that was a huge risk because my goal was always I'm going to match my corporate salary and then I'll leave. But it gets to this tipping point where it's like, if I'm spending 40 hours a week at the corporate job, it's never going to get to that point where I can, really move on from it. So it was such a risk, when I walked away. I believe I was pregnant with my second when I left the corporate job. But it was just so obvious to me and probably everyone I worked with that I was not into that anymore. Like that was not what I was giving 100% to. So I do think I was pregnant with her. So it was probably 18 months after I started. So after May of 2011. And I left, and we had no money, and we were super broke. I drove like a 20-year-old car, and we lived in this tiny little house, and my kids wore secondhand clothes, and we just made it work.
Willing to do whatever it takes.
Yep. And every dollar of profit just went right back into the business.
Well, going back to what you just said a few moments ago, I want to emphasize this for the audience, that you had this realization that you could never do both. You were never going to get Twinkle Toes to where it needed to be by working full-time in property management. It comes down to whether somebody has enough willingness to risk it all, and not just, anybody could say, well, I'm just going to do it, but it's really having a plan and belief that there is no turning back. I'm a huge believer in plan B is a cop-out.
Yep.
Just think, if you would have kept the property management job and Twinkle Toes at the same time, if the nanny agency thing didn't really take off, you would have always said to yourself, well, but I had the property management career. That's my fallback. And so when you have a fallback, you never make it through a difficult time, because if the nanny agency didn't work, when you would have had inevitable challenges, you would have easily given it up.
Right.
And I think that's what too many people go wrong, is they think, oh, well, what you do is you keep both going, and then you make the leap after the salary equates to what.
And I think there's something to be said too for like intentionally placing yourself in an uncomfortable situation, which is what I did by leaving the security of, a set salary, health insurance, 401k. Now I'm in this very uncomfortable situation. If I had waited until it was comfortable to leave, number one, I don't think I would have ever been comfortable enough to leave.
Right.
But to be willing to be uncomfortable and to eat rice and beans for, 6 months to a year or whatever it was, then that's such a motivator to like get out of this uncomfortable place.
Yes. Yeah. I've heard the term or the phrase, the amount of progress we make is based on the amount of uncomfortableness we can handle.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And you were able to withstand a lot of uncomfortable situation.
Yes.
In the face of willing to, this was it. You were willing to put it all out there and willing to fail. And willing to fail is probably one of the greatest attributes we can have as an entrepreneur. It's like, we know we're not going to let ourselves fail, but the willingness to take the risk is something that not everybody can, nor should they do, if they really don't have that wherewithal.
Yeah, I agree.
Who was supportive of this?
Did my husband call you and tell you to ask me this?
He did not.
On the way down here, he's like, make sure you mention how wonderful and supportive your husband has been through all these years.
What's his name?
Justin.
So tell me, what did Justin say about all this? He
was 100% on board from day one. He really was. No, he was like, he had a job, we could switch to his insurance, and he was always 100%, you can do it. If I needed him to take the kids, for the day so that I could go do an event at the park or like meet parents or whatever, he never complained. He was and still is my biggest supporter.
There's a big message in this too. It's that when you're starting out any business, that we're going to have the challenges and we're going to have struggles. And we have to, while we may have some friends and family that are dead against it because, again, like I said, they're looking out for us, they don't see it for themselves. But I've always said that it's so important to have that spouse or partner be supportive. And my wife was always supportive of day one. Everything I wanted to do, she was supportive of. I speak as a franchisor that have seen hundreds of franchisees, or maybe close to 1,000 if you include potential franchisees. And I've seen why franchisors and why franchisees succeed and why they fail.
Yes.
And time again, the franchisees that succeeded are because they had spousal support. And the ones that failed were often because the partner or spouse wasn't bought in, didn't believe in it. I've told the story once before where there was this really nice couple. They were in Fort Myers, Florida. The husband wanted the franchise terribly. He wanted it so bad. The wife did not want it. And so they came to Discovery Day. At the end of Discovery Day, back back then, they would come, they'd sit in my office and I would kind of review everything. Never like closed a deal or anything at Discovery Day. That's just not how I operated, but I wanted to get their feedback. And so the wife, who had her arms crossed the whole time during Discovery Day, and really in the process, I knew that she wasn't on board. At the end, I said, I don't think I know this franchise is not for you. And I turned to her and I said, because I know he's going to have a bad day or a bad week, and you're going to say, I told you so. And as the story went, I was young and dumb and a new franchisor, and I gave in because her and him begged me that they would do this and they would be successful. And of course, it didn't work out that way. And I knew better. But to your point, like, Justin supported you, and you need that.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I hope this message is for franchisors that are listening to this, that make sure you got to listen to your gut. You hear that voice inside your head when this potential franchisee is not a right fit. I've
regretted it every time.
Have you had that happen before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And you knew in your heart,
Yes.
like, this is not, like, what was it? What were some of the triggers maybe where that little voice inside your head was like, this is not the right one?
Yep. And I sold to him anyway, and I regretted it.
Yep.
I've never not regretted it. When I've talked myself into somebody,
right,
I've never not regretted it. There was a similar one. Husband wanted it, wife didn't, but well, she didn't say she didn't want it.
Okay.
She just never talked. And she was the one who was going to be running it.
Oh, I love that. I've had that before. The wife got a business that she didn't even want.
She did, yeah. I mean, she said she did, but she had no questions, no feedback, very, very quiet. And guess what? It didn't work out. Right. I had one where I could tell from day one, she was very negative, like everything. And now, as luck would have it, I had two people kind of going through the process at the same time. Different parts of the country, but same process, dealing with the same people, same FDD. Everything was identical. One of them had a great attitude and would ask these questions and would take my answer and, like, understood everything. This other person had a complaint. And I don't mean like critical of the franchise agreement, because that's good. You want that. You want those questions. But I mean critical of, like, why did this training person say this to me? Like, okay, we're petty now. Like, now we're being petty because she said the same thing to the other person,
right,
and to everybody else who's come through. She just took everything personally, and she just saw everything as a negative. Which,
could you imagine this person as a franchisee is now dealing with parents?
Yes, and nannies.
Oh my gosh. How do you, right, and nannies, how do you think that's going to work out then, right?
Right. Yeah, and she looked good on paper. It was a great territory. I mean, the way I talked myself into it was like, well, with our training, she's got our corporate support. It's you can't not be successful here. Like, you will be successful.
Right.
And that was just the dumbest thing I've ever told myself, because less than a year later, I now have that location.
Well, and we've all done that. So let's talk about the locations. You've got 21 franchises open. You franchised in 2017. You have the one company-owned location, though. So although you're in Gainesville, Florida, your company-owned location is in Texas because you took it over. Oh my gosh, Kristy, I've been there. Here I am in Tampa. I had to take over a location of all places, completely across the country in Portland, Oregon, in 2009, because I had a franchisee who was actually doing a pretty good job and was making money, but was mismanaging his money. And we were surprised when customers told us they weren't going to be getting, could you imagine the kids weren't going to be getting trophies because the franchisee said there's no money.
Oh, no.
And so we took care of that. And I flew out to Oregon. I called my wife one day from the office and I said, hey, what are we doing this summer? And she's like, I don't know. Why? I'm like, I think we're going to Portland this summer. I have to go hire somebody.
Oh my gosh.
But so tell me about that for you. What was that all like, taking a location?
This one?
Yeah.
Because this isn't the only one. This is just the one I have right now.
Sure.
Luckily, the franchisee, because it can happen many ways. You can terminate. It can be a mutual termination. It can be not so mutual. You can buy it back. Like, there's a lot of different ways. This was mutual. She realized it wasn't for her and that she didn't have the support that she needed. There was also some medical stuff going on that was causing issues. So it just wasn't what she wanted. And so it luckily wasn't a combative or like a crazy takeover or anything like that. But it was mutual, and It just wasn't a good fit for her.
It happens. And it was a very important location that you couldn't let it close. And I think that's a great message to share with fellow founders out there, that if you have a location, where in Texas is this, by the way?
San Antonio.
So great market.
Yeah.
And we can't just let it close, because it's going to hurt the brand and potentially hurt the brand of having other
And it's
locations.
going to hurt the families who were there relying on us for childcare. And it's going to hurt the nannies who are relying on us for jobs.
Sure.
I mean, it's all the way.
All right, let's go back to the beginning of franchising, because we kind of skipped over it. We kind of got right into it. So when you founded the company in 2011, you were running your location for about 6 years. What led you to franchising?
I'm trying to remember. I think I opened in Jacksonville next. I had my husband's sister, so my sister-in-law lived there and wanted to open one. So we opened that together as a partnership. And that wasn't a franchise. It was, something that I owned. I hadn't franchised yet, but I knew I wanted to see if it could work in other markets. So I thought Jacksonville would be a great way to test that. It seemed to work there. And then I had this nanny who worked for me in Gainesville. Her name was Robin. And I almost didn't hire her, because when she came to the interview, I thought she was high, because she's from like South Georgia, and the way she talks, and she kind of like, it's slow and a little bit slurred. And I called one of her references. I was like, is she high? Like, why does she? And they laughed. They're like, that's just how she talks. She doesn't do drugs. She's solid. Like, you can hire her. So I did. And she is still with me. This was 8 years ago, I think. So she came on and worked as a nanny in Gainesville, and then was moving to Tampa. Like maybe 2 or 3 years after she had been with me in Gainesville, she was moving to Tampa, and she was so good, I didn't want to lose her. So I said, well, what if I open a Twinkle Toes in Tampa and you manage it? I'll own it.
Okay.
I'll, financially support it. You can manage it. She was like, okay. So that was the third kind of expansion.
Okay.
So Robin ran that one, and we just sold it. And that one has been the most successful one that we've ever had.
In Tampa?
In Tampa. Yep.
Nice.
Just sold it last year. So Robin ran it for, I believe, 7 or 8 years as the manager. Grew it, sold it last year, and now she's my COO and does like new franchisee support, does all the new franchisee training. So that went from, I think she's high, I'm not going to hire her, to like she's the COO now.
Wow. All right, Kristy. So back to what led you to franchising. You didn't have any franchise background or experience like any of us, right?
Right.
Did you seek out like a consultant, franchise attorney? What was kind of the steps that you went through when you franchised your company?
Eventually I did, but a mom in Gainesville who was a client of mine called me and said, I know you're in Tampa, in Jacksonville. My sister lives in Pinellas County and wants to open a Twinkle Toes there. Are you a franchise? Like, how would that work? And at this point, I owned all of the locations, so nothing was set up to franchise.
And had you thought about franchising before then?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. My plan was kind of like, keep it manageable in Florida and I'll just own them.
Sure.
Because I knew how to do that. Franchising is totally different. I knew nothing about it. So what I did was a licensing agreement with this person. And then after the fact, I talked to a franchise attorney, and she's like, you can't do that. So she's like, by definition, that is a franchise.
You had really franchised, it sounds like. Yeah.
I illegally franchised.
And unintentionally.
Yes, unintentionally.
Yes,
I was
happens.
ignorant, but IRS doesn't care if you're ignorant. That franchise attorney, I don't even remember how I met her. I think I had a friend who was a franchisor, and she used her. So I met with her. She made me legitimate, real franchise. And then it was all legit. And then from there, the next few locations were parents who moved somewhere else and there wasn't a Twinkle Toes, and then they opened one. Or a nanny who moved away and had worked for our location somewhere and loved the company and opened one.
Kristy,
So it was very organic.
You're an accidental franchisor.
Accidental, yep.
And you quickly found out that being a franchisor is completely different than the nanny business.
Yes.
Because now you are in the franchise business.
Yes.
What were some of the, early on, what were some of the challenges that you faced as being a franchisor of a new concept?
I think, well, there's a few. So one thing is people will call me interested in, opening a franchise, and they want to do it because they love kids. And and I understand, why they have that misunderstanding. But like you said, like I don't see kids all day. I don't take care of kids. I was a nanny, yes, but this is strictly business. Like you're not taking care of kids. You can hate kids and still successfully run a Twinkle Toes. I don't recommend that. Disclaimer, that's not what we're looking for. But it has nothing to do with kids. You're dealing with parents. I mean, you need a little bit of knowledge of because you need to interview the nannies, but like this is running a business. This is not taking care of kids. It's totally different. I learned that early on because I thought, well, this nanny was a great nanny and now she wants to be a franchisee. But that does not translate to knowing how to run a business.
Yes. I learned the same exact lesson the hard way.
All the lessons we've learned are the hard way.
None
of them are like, none of them are I guess there are some in a book, but I don't learn those lessons.
No, I generally have to learn them on my own too.
Yep.
Yeah, my lesson was the same thing. I thought if you liked sports, that you should open an I-9 Sports franchise. So I was getting people that were like a former college football player that, he blew out his knee, but he would have been a pro if he didn't get hurt. And what I found very quickly were the people that knew sports were the worst franchise owners because they were so hell-bent focused on like things like the rules of the game. Do you think, I'm obviously preaching to the choir here, but would you think for a second in the home office and franchising that we talked about home runs and touchdowns and
Nope.
No, we talk about marketing, management, operations, finance, technology, like running the business. And the sports or the nanny agency is nothing more than the vehicle that we use, right? To deliver the product or service. Right. That's really key though for hopefully our audience of people that are thinking of going to franchising because they think, oh, I'm franchising a nanny business. They need to love kids, or sports. They need to love kids, or home services. They need to know about, they need to be able, I don't know, build a house or something, or be able to do all kind of maintenance. No, that's not it.
That's not it at all.
That, in fact, if anything, that's a hindrance because people can easily focus then on the wrong thing. So I'm glad you got that lesson. I'm glad you shared that. Thank you so much. As you started growing the franchise, did you have, how big was your team?
It was me. I was the team. Team Kristy.
And how long was it Team Kristy until you brought somebody on? Like, what was the first person that you brought on to be part of like a leadership?
It was Robin when we sold Tampa last year.
Right.
I mean, she was doing new franchisee training for me as she was the manager of Tampa. So she would, a couple days a week train the new franchises or new franchisees, but she didn't have like an official role there.
Okay.
And she did by default kind of turn into the person that everybody called when they were having issues or had questions or whatever, just because she had been there the longest. So once we sold Tampa, we could actually pay her for that work that she was doing and make it official and give her a title. And that's really it. It's me, it's Robin, and we have fractional marketing. But as far as the team on payroll, working for corporate Twinkle Toes, it's the two of us.
You guys. And Brooke is your fractional
correct
marketing person. Awesome. Elaborate a little bit on training. Because I have no idea. What does training even look like if you're running a nanny agency?
Well, training looks like it happens in Gainesville at our corporate office there. So whoever it is, wherever they are, they come to Gainesville and we do 3 days of in-person training. Robin does that. I'm there usually. What we do is go through the SOP, the standard operating procedure, and that's, half the day. And then we go through the custom software that we have, which is the next probably day and a half. So we've had built this software that contains all of the scheduling. It processes all of the payments. It pays the nannies. I mean, it's really, when I started, I had 4 different platforms for all those different things. I was using QuickBooks and at first I was just using Google Calendar for all of the scheduling. And then I thought, well, this would be better if I could find this. So then I subscribed to something that did that. So finally I found a developer that could build what I wanted. It's Twinkle Toes and Twinkle Toes only. It communicates with the families and the nannies via email and text, makes schedule changes and, alerts them to when there's a schedule change. And the biggest piece that we just added last was the payment processing.
So technology is really a huge part. You could say you're really in the technology business.
Don't say that though. I hate it. I hate it so much. Like I do not want to be in this.
You don't want to say you're a technology company.
I don't. I hate it.
Why?
I know I'm not supposed to say that, but
why?
I'm sorry. You
feel like it feels cold? Is that the problem?
No. I feel like, because I feel like it's a missed opportunity because I've been approached about, the system that I've had built and kind of outsourcing it and not outsourcing it, but licensing it and selling it to other businesses. To you. And the reason I haven't is because I do not want to be the CEO of a tech company. I hate it.
Well, what if somebody else was?
I mean, that's an option. You can give my phone number out.
Well, is this a legacy business for you, or do you see yourself doing this to a certain number and saying, I've taken
I don't have a number in mind, but I also wouldn't be opposed to it, but I just can't see myself not working. Like Fine. I can't retire. I'll never retire.
But Twinkle Toes itself, is it a legacy like you could see yourself doing this for life?
Probably. I don't know. That's a hard question. I haven't planned my life that far in advance. I mean, I have no interest in leaving anytime soon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you're just getting started. I mean, but 21 franchises is impressive. I love that you're not focused on just the quantity, the number of franchises that we sell, but do you have a vision on like how big is big, or the number of locations that you'd like to open next 3 to 5 years? What does that look like?
I do. I have a goal of 5 within the next year, within the next 12 months, because I've made some pretty big changes to the franchise agreement, to the support that we're offering. We brought Robin on, we've got Brooke. We're doing work with a couple of different people to really kind of prop them up in the marketing sphere. So I think that all of that, I mean, my goal right now is not to necessarily have more locations. My goal is to get my current locations as successful as they can be and to support those franchisees however they need to be supported. But I think through that, I mean, a natural result of that is going to be selling more locations because, it's going to be an attractive item 19.
Right.
And it's just a matter of kind of getting the word out about it.
I agree with you. I found anytime I was focused on the right things, I'm focused on being the best, you become the biggest. I mean, not that I saw it. I did not seek out to be the biggest. I was really seeking out to be the best. And the biggest came as a result of being the best.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's the way to go. Anytime I tried to make a decision like strategically based on the numbers, it never really worked out for me.
No.
I'm fascinated because some people it's different. Like they focus on the numbers, on how big is big, and then they draw a roadmap on how to get there. But that's just never really, it's just, I don't know, for me, it just never worked.
Yeah, I mean, I've got some key locations in my head that like I want to be in that city and that city.
Yeah.
And I've got a list of my top 5 where I want to be just because I know there's a hole in the market and it would be a great territory. But like I said, I'm really focused on getting the current franchisees the support that they need, the weak ones that, maybe aren't suited for it, either get them, whatever support they need to kind of level up, or let's talk about an exit strategy and get somebody in there that, is better suited for it.
Good for you. That's the reality of franchising,
That's
right?
the hardest part to me.
It is.
Because I like everybody that I work with. I don't have a single franchisee that I don't like. So when you were talking about mistakes earlier, I was thinking like one of the other mistakes is liking somebody.
Yes.
And selling to them because you like them and you get along with them and they're fun and you have a great rapport, but that doesn't make them a good business person.
I agree with you. I've hired people because I like them.
Yep.
I used to get caught up in if they were charismatic on a job interview. I was drawn to them and I'd hire them and then they would start working for me. And then I'm like, wait, where did that person go?
And then you have to fire somebody that you like. Yeah.
There's nothing worse than that.
That's the worst.
Yeah. So you know what I would do is if I interviewed somebody, if you came in through my door and like you were over the top charismatic and I was drawn to you and liked you, I had like a trigger in my head was I had to be even more difficult on the interview. Like I would challenge that person so much more. Because I would say to myself, oh no, I'm not going to.
You're not fooling me.
You're not fooling me. I'm going to absolutely put you through the ringer on this interview.
Yep.
But we get caught up in it because we like people. And especially if they come because they want to buy your franchise, they want to buy your brand, they believe in it, they're saying all the right things. That's why I'm a huge believer in an assessment tool like Predictive Index. I don't know if you've looked at any of those, or DISC, or really anything. Have you guys looked at any of that?
I do the DISC test
you do
now.
DISC. I think that's great. I always tell people, I don't care what you use, but use something.
Right.
There
has to be something objective.
Yes.
And that's been one of the hardest things is like, I was talking to a franchisee on the way down here about she's wanting to hire a manager. And it's like, it's so hard to tell how they're going to do when they're in the seat and under pressure.
Right.
And what questions can we ask to determine that? And I was telling her about the DISC test and how, I've given it to all of my top performers and my lowest performers. So I know what I want and I know what I don't want. And it's amazing how consistent it is.
Isn't it?
My top performers are like heavy D's. And then my weakest ones, they all score the same. So now when there's a franchisee that's interested, they get the test. And if they scored D or I, they can continue in the process.
Good for you.
And if they're one of the other two letters, like, yeah. Thanks, but no thanks.
So Kristy, back to when we're looking at potential franchisees, and again, I know you're really mindful that they need to be they need to fit with your culture and your brand. When they're doing their due diligence, what's maybe some advice that you give them?
Well, I think the best that they can do is talk to existing franchisees.
Sure.
I mean, that's definitely the best. And I always try to connect them with like right now I'm talking to somebody who is a preschool teacher, and I have a franchisee who left her preschool teaching job to do this. And so I tell her, like, make sure you call Joyce. You probably won't call everyone, but make sure you call her because she too is a single mom, leaving a preschool job. Like, that's who you want to connect with. Or if there's someone in their geographic area, I tell them, like, make sure you touch base with her because you guys will probably be, sharing events and working closely together. I always tell them to do their market research, like secret shop other agencies, call them and act like you're a family, call them and act like you're a nanny.
Great.
And just learn, like, the biggest thing, which this is so weird to me, it never fails every time we do this, the number of times people just don't answer the phone.
Yes.
And don't call back. Like, and so the takeaway is, like, do you see, if you just answer your phone, you're going to get the business.
Right.
Just be available.
Right.
You will get the business. And that's a huge lesson for them. But that's also why in my franchise agreement, you're not allowed to have another job. This is all you can do.
Good for you.
Because it's a full-time job. Like we talked about earlier, like if I were trying to do property management and this never would have happened. So, but that's the biggest takeaway. It's like, that's why you can't be doing something else, because when the phone rings, you have to answer it.
Yeah. People still do like to speak on the phone.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially parents.
Yes. Yes. I don't remember the actual statistic, but it is super high statistic of the odds that you will actually close a franchisee by you being the first one to answer the phone, because
the franchisor being the first one?
The franchisor. You will be the selected franchisor by a potential franchisee by you answering the phone. In other words, a potential franchisee is going to call a lot of franchises, and the franchisor that answers the phone first is most likely going to get that deal. Because,
I believe that.
Yeah, because even in franchising, you have franchisors that are not answering the phone.
Yep.
What are some of the traits of a successful franchisee?
Wow. Some traits. So being decisive, not overcomplicating things.
Right.
I was just having this conversation with someone yesterday. The reason you buy a franchise is because we have figured out what works, right? So don't buy a franchise and then try to find a better way and complicate it. Because that's what I spent 6 years doing, even longer. Even after I was a franchisor, I was still doing that. What we have now is the recipe for success. And if you're buying, like, that's what you're buying into. So don't try to complicate it and change it. There's not a better way. If there was, that would be the way we did it. It's a weird mix when you're looking for franchisees, because they have to be part entrepreneur, but also part employee.
Right.
And I don't mean in the legal tax sense.
Right.
I mean, like, you have to be able to follow instruction and do it the way that it's supposed to be done. That's the employee part. But you also have to be able to problem solve, be creative with your marketing, with your networking, have that spirit of, like, independence and willing to try new things. But you also have to stay within these bounds. So it's a weird mix.
And you just reconfirmed why DISC or predictive index is critical, because it can never come through on an interview.
Nope.
And they can't fake their way through DISC or predictive index.
No.
That's going to come through loud and clear, especially if you know ahead of time this is the common traits of a successful franchisor, or where they get tripped up, a successful franchisee, or where they get tripped up, is not willingness to follow the details. Or in my case, if somebody, there's a fine line between being patient and impatient. And
what do you mean?
Somebody that's very impatient with wanting to succeed, they would burn out. So they needed a level of patience because if they were impatient enough, they had that get up and go. But if they had too much patience, they maybe didn't necessarily have that fire. So it's like those things don't come through on an interview.
Right. Yeah. My favorite is the people that are like, I'm just, really thinking positive and I'm going to manifest the business to come in. I'm just like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
You've got to be kidding me. You can't manifest success.
No, you have to get up in the morning and actually do something.
Go do it.
But you can manifest it too, but go ahead and actually do the work.
The manifesting is the
result.
The result of you getting up early and answering the phone and going to the events and doing the things.
Right. Yes, yeah. I totally agree with you. Kristy, this has been wonderful. If somebody was interested in learning more about your franchise opportunity, where would they go?
They would go to twinkletoesnanny.com. There's a franchising link there with all the information. Sweet.
And they would speak to you or Robin?
They would speak to Jody.
Oh, Jody. I'm sorry.
And I didn't mention her earlier because she's kind of an independent salesperson that handles our sales.
Nice.
But they would either speak to me or Jody.
Okay. And all right, so they'll take them through the process. How long is generally the process from start to finish?
For a new franchise?
Yeah.
I would say it can be as long as 3 months. It can be as short as 1 month.
Okay, cool. Awesome.
I find out after the fact sometimes that people have been like following me on social media before they ever call.
Of course.
Like the one, I have a buyer for San Antonio and she called me and she was like, I've been following you for like a year and I'm finally ready to do it. I'm like, wow. Okay. So it matters what you're putting out there, I guess.
Great. Kristy, I always finish a podcast with what I call the franchise tip jar, because the franchise community is so generous with sharing tips and tricks and strategies. So would you give me some advice? Let's say I had a company and I wanted to go into franchising and I had not franchised yet. What would be a piece of advice you'd give me before I start franchising?
Don't franchise?
No. Why is that?
I'm kidding. I heard somebody say that once and it just made me laugh. I think it would go back to what we were talking about before with trust your gut. Like always, always, always follow your intuition when you're assessing any situation really, but especially whether or not you're a good fit with someone personality-wise.
Excellent advice. Well, Kristy, thank you so much for being on the show. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You. Thank you for tuning into the Emerging Franchise Brands podcast. For additional insights, guest applications, and to stay connected, visit us at efbpodcast.com. The Emerging Franchise Brands podcast is for entertainment purposes only, and the views expressed do not necessarily represent those of Emerging Franchise Brands, its host Frank Fumey, or Emerging Franchise Group, LLC. Any discussed franchise or investment opportunity requires thorough investigation, obtaining proper disclosure documents, and expert consultation before making any investment decisions. The podcast and its host do not offer professional advice or endorsements, and they hold no responsibility for actions, representations, accuracy, or consequential damages related to the podcast content.